How's it going, ladies and gentlemen? I just finished recording with Father Lovell. It was an excellent conversation. We didn't know what we were going to talk about when it started, and we talked about everything from Vatican II to environmentalism to Archbishop Lefebvre to Bishop Castro to the reality of canceled priests to predictions about what's going to come with getting rid of Humanae Vitae, which we think might happen. Absolutely everything. I don't know what to call this episode. We might call it something like wherein Father Lovell and Kennedy rant about absolutely everything. It was a great conversation. You're gonna love this. I can guarantee it. And just before we get to the conversation, please check out the TKR store. You can see here I'm using my iPhone camera. It makes my beard look a little grayer than it is. Nonetheless, it does get grayer with each passing child of ours that's born. And so check out the TKR store to see the beard products we have available. And so just enjoy this quick ad here and then enjoy the show. We'll see you at the end. Go to thekennedyreport.com and visit the TKR store to see our new products. Kennedy's Choice Beard Oil. You can use this on your beard to help with alleviating itchiness, dryness, and irritation of skin. And don't worry, no animals were used in testing this product except for myself. Use Kennedy's Choice Beard Balm for a softer, healthier, manageable beard that is made with natural ingredients. And trust me, I know a thing or two about beards. Visit thekennedyreport.com and check out the TKR store. The links for this are in the description. Good day, ladies and gentlemen. I'm Kennedy Hall, and I'm here with Father Lovell, my good friend. And what is your technical position at the Coalition for Council's Priests? Is it president or co-founder? What is it, Father?
Co-founder. I was the president, happily gave up those reins, and just simply co-founder now, running both the blog and at least my part of the store when it comes to the coalition. A big part of that was the conference, a House
Okay.
United. Yeah, co-founder.
Okay, so here with Father Lovell, co-founder, you see how much background information or invest or background research I do before I go on the air. And we just had the pleasure of we were presenters, and he was the organizer of the House United Coalition for Canceled Priests second annual conference in Rosemont, Chicagoland. And it was a good trip. None of us got shot, despite what they say about Chicago. And we only witnessed one attempted kidnapping, true story, out on the road driving by. So a pretty tame weekend in Chicago. But in all seriousness, it was an incredible conference, a very special. We'll talk about this as we go, but it was clear to me that the purpose of the conference was to save souls, which isn't always the purpose of every conference. So I thought that was something special. But anyway, thank you for coming on, Father.
Oh no, thank you for having me, Kennedy. It's always a pleasure to come on your show, and it's real ecumenism with when Americans and Canadians can speak. So
It is. Yep. It's good. It's good. Actually, I do have a cup of Tim Hortons coffee right here for all my Canucks. It's empty now, but I'll use it for my my dip later. But so okay, so Father, this conference was pretty magnificent. It was pretty electric. And what are your takeaways and feelings from it?
well, we were talking in pre-show about this, that you had speakers who just a little while ago were on EWTN, or were part of what I call the neocon squad, the neocon side of things, the George Weigel side of things.
Right.
And what you're seeing is even they are starting to wake up to the problem, especially in the last 5 years with the McCarrick scandal, Pachamama, COVID, Traditionis Custodes, and they've had enough. And they've simply had enough, and they've had. We decided to gather all of these people, not all of them who agree on everything, in order to show not only support for canceled priests, but to show that Catholics can actually sit down and have a conversation. And while we're getting the videos out as quickly as we can, to all those that say, "Well, I'll just watch the videos. I didn't have to be there." That the videos and the talks were just half of it.
Mm-hmm.
For me, what I noticed, and I noticed this early on Friday morning, about a 10 or 11 o'clock, just a couple hours as the conference went off, was the camaraderie, was the fellowship, was the fraternity. People were happy to be there and to be in each other's company. Not just the priests, not just the speakers, but everyone, and it was great to see.
Yeah, I was speaking with my friend Al Smith, who runs the Bishop Sheen Today Foundation, and him and I have gone to a couple of conferences together. Um, he's a good friend. He's a Canadian as well, and he was remarking, having gone to a billion conferences when he was kind of in the Novus Ordo world, and he's more cozy with the trads now, and so he's going both sides of the aisle. And he said this was probably the best he's ever been to as far as just the basic spirit of the thing. Often when you go to these conferences, the purpose of the conference is the conference, if that makes sense. It's like, here is, and this isn't an indictment on any particular person or group. It's just, here is a conference about X, Y, and Z, and you come away really excited about X, Y, and Z, and that's fine. But this was more like, we're here because being a Catholic today and being to the right of Bishop Barron makes you a domestic terrorist. And that's just absolutely insane. To be honest, Bishop Barron will be canceled at some point. I mean, if he doesn't become an actual leftist, he's still pro-life. He still said something nasty about the Dodgers, and the fake nuns or whatever. I mean, even that's going to be unacceptable in 15 minutes, especially with Smoochie Fernandez, the new head of not even the congregation, the dicastery for the doctrine of the faith. We're going to have a man who writes actual perverted poetry in the same office that Cardinal Ottaviani was in. And I think Robert Bellarmine. I mean, that's just absolutely bananas. So, I mean, I was remarking to you off air and other friends as well, and we got back, I'm this guy I'm canceled. I'm self-canceled. I realized when I came out in this sort of Catholic apologetical world, there was no way I was going to hide my opinions about the Society of St. Pius X, and I realized I better get them out so everyone knows who I am, so I'll know who my friends are and don't have to pretend. And that's just a decision I made a few years ago. And I thought at that point, all right, I'm always going to be relegated to, I'll be with the Fatima Center over here, or I'll be maybe the Remnant will say hello over there. I'll be with sort of the traditional Catholic mainstays, which is great, fine, fair enough. But I never thought in a million years that I'd be speaking at a conference with Doug Barry, who had a show on EWTN about 15 minutes ago, Jesse Romero, doing stuff, working for Diocese and EWTN Radio. Even John Henry Weston at one point was with Catholic Answers doing apologetics. Janet E. Smith, talk about mainstream Catholicism. I mean, she's at a seminary in Detroit that trains the Companions of the Cross. We're not in Lefebvre's territory in that way, and just the list keeps going. And I thought, wow, this is hilarious. Here I am at this conference, and these are all people who are in Scott Hahn's Rolodex. And here we are. And I just thought, this is really...
At least they were.
Yeah. I mean, he's been getting he calls himself a glad trad, so we'll give him the benefit of the doubt. Who knows? But the point is like, we're in a very strange time where pretty much everyone who's an Orthodox Catholic is probably going to be canceled or should be prepared to be canceled any day now. That's what I think.
You're absolutely right. And one thing that you've mentioned about those three people is that they've discovered tradition. Yes, they knew about the traditional Mass before, but Jesse and Janet, and I think Doug, exclusively attend the traditional Mass now. While they were certainly more towards what I call the neocon camp at one point, they've certainly embraced tradition. And they're open to having conversations, especially Jesse. Jesse says, if you believe the creed, you follow the creed, you're my brother, and I'm going to speak to you. And they're going to speak with everyone that is of goodwill, Catholics of goodwill. And that's why you saw Jesse not back down from Hope is Fuel with Patrick Coffin. That is why you see someone like David L. Gray engaging with E. Michael Jones. You're seeing all of this happen because they're realizing evangelization cannot happen if we do not have a conversation. And I'll tell you this, Kennedy, when people try to paint me as the SSPX apologist, I only met my first society priest in March of 2021. I went to the Angelus Press Conference that December. It was a little bit later because of COVID in downtown Kansas City. Christopher Check, president of Catholic Answers, was speaking at it. And I just went up to Father Fullerton and I explained to him what we're doing. And I said, I just want to let you know, I don't look at things as, lefty Catholic, neocon Catholic, charismatic Catholic, or even traditional Catholic. I just look at it as being Catholic. And lo and behold, the next day, Father Pagliani, who was also there, sat down, had lunch with me in Kansas City. A week later, I get invited up to their priory in Chicago to have lunch with him in a private discussion about how they could help. And I thought, this is what we're talking about. This is what we need to do. We don't need to agree on everything. We don't need to say that everything was done perfectly well in the last 75 years on either side. But what we can say is that we're Catholics and we want the best for everyone and we want to get to heaven. And so that was the point when Joe Gallagher came to me as head of our communications and said, I think we have a theme. Let's sit down with Jesse. And we thought, a house united. And that's not knocking anyone that pushes unite or die or unite the clans. There are a lot of good people in that movement, unite the clans. But you also have some people who are just like, yes, unite the clans except for that clan and that clan and that clan. And really, as long as you're not insane and you are attempting to reach heaven, we're going to have a conversation with you. That's what it comes down to.
Now, when you went and sat with Father Pagliani and the priory of the SSPX, what arguments did they give you to come into schism with them? Because I just want to put it in my repertoire.
That's the interesting thing. We didn't do that at all. We, being a very Polish city, Chicago, and I'm assuming the priests at the Chicago Priory wanting to impress Father Pagliani, it was the Vigilia, the vigil meal for Christmas Eve, even though it was a couple of days before Christmas Eve. But they were all leaving to go to their different chapels, and Father Pagliani was staying there to do a solemn high midnight mass with Father McMahon. And to be honest with you, we just had a discussion about how things are not 1988 anymore, and that we have to be careful of falling into the old prejudices. We shouldn't be looking at the society as we once did. We shouldn't be looking at the fraternity as we once did. That generation has passed, or at least most of them have passed. Mm-hmm. And we have to start looking in fresh eyes and saying, wait a minute, we have a lot more in common, especially after Traditionis Custodes, especially after the COVID lockdowns. And that's one thing that I've always admired, at least of the society priests that I've met. They don't take this attitude of, we told you so. No. They take more of an attitude of, we're here to help you be a better Catholic priest. And that's the whole point of the Society of Pius X, is to build up the Catholic priesthood, plain and simple. And so to credit where credit is due. Now, people want to have debates about this argument or that argument, fine, as long as you do it in charity and realize that what unites us is more important than what divides us, I think is so important. And for anyone that says, well, the Society of Pius X must be in schism, well, you're disagreeing with the Vatican's own prelate, Bishop Schneider, who was sent there specifically to do a visitation on the society seminaries. And so, be careful when we throw around the word schismatic, because it's starting to sound a lot like the word racist. You don't like something, or I don't like something, you say, I'm just going to simply call you a racist to win the argument. And that's not how it should be. And again, for anyone that's going to attack me for saying that says, well, they're covering up things, blah, 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 blah. You said this on my show. Name me a diocese, name me a religious order that hasn't had a problem and hasn't had to deal with the problem when it comes to sexual abuse, as horrible as it is. And you had the best line, Kennedy. And the line was simply this: life imprisonment is not a severe enough punishment for anyone that abuses another human being.
Mm-hmm. Well, that's good. I had a good line. That doesn't happen very often. Well, I would say, name me 12 apostles without a traitor who tries to kill Jesus, right? I mean, it's just doesn't exist, and it's the mystery of iniquity. It's the mystery. Actually, yesterday, Father Perot, if you're watching, Father Perot, it was a wonderful sermon. We had a 5 p.m. mass because every once in a while we have a new chapel, we have a priory. You know how society priests live. I think coming out of the seminary, they're trained how to live on 5 hours of sleep and a pot of coffee a day and get frequent. They don't have frequent flyer miles; they have frequent driver miles or something. So it was one of those weekends where all the priests were all over the place, and it happens once a month. So we had a 5 p.m. mass instead of a normal 9 a.m. And so Father Perot came, no air conditioning, 90 degrees, whatever, humidity, and gave a sermon on King David and King Saul. And, he was going through just the hatred that Saul had for David, and how David was able to forgive him, and how David was able to withstand that and just sort of take it. And I'm just thinking, Saul is literally God's anointed, and here he is chucking spears at David as he's playing him a harp. It's like absolutely insane, but that's a man chosen by God, literally by the prophets of God, to lead the people of Israel. So, and then of course, David is chosen by God, and, he has his best friend murdered so he can sleep with his wife. There's this mystery of iniquity. I think sometimes God allows these evil things to happen within people that we expect to be better than that, to remind us of the fact that we're essentially the same. And if we're not careful, we'll have the same fate. All of us are much closer to an axe murderer than we are to Padre Pio. And I think Padre Pio would say he was as close to an axe murderer as anybody, hence the humility. And we have to recognize it in ourselves. And anyway, but, it's fascinating. You say it's not 1988 anymore. The speech that I gave, which actually, I think I'm gonna air this episode after, because I probably won't get it edited before. So if you're watching this now, when you finish this, go check out my speech on Archbishop Lefebvre and the SSPX, which I was very proud of. I tried very hard for that. And the whole crux of the speech was, listen, at some point, if you're here at the Canceled Priest Conference, you believe in something called a state of necessity. You believe that there is something called an emergency of faith. And if you didn't believe it in 88, I wasn't even born. I was born 3 months before the consecrations. If you didn't believe it in the 90s, if you didn't believe it here, if you didn't believe it there, you believe it now. And if it exists now, it existed then, because this is not something that happened overnight. And we look to Scripture and we find, a prophet is not accepted in his own country. It makes perfect sense that Archbishop Lefebvre would have been cast to the exterior darkness, because that's what they did to that's what they did to John the Baptist. That's what they did to all these men who call out the corruption in the hierarchy, and that's just how it goes. But here we are in 2023, and we're in a place where EWTN starlets are having to hang out with this motley crew of canceled priests in Chicago. And if that doesn't speak volumes, I don't know what was. So I think this idea that we have to move forward together and put aside some of the differences, it just makes perfect sense to me.
While you're saying that, another date came into my head. It's no longer 1958.
Yeah,
and
yeah.
For those that know Archbishop Lefebvre, in the summer of 1958, he was considered a rock star.
Yeah.
In the Vatican. I mean, there were even talks of making him a cardinal for all the work that he did in Africa.
Yeah.
And then all of a sudden we have a change in pontificate. They ask him to step aside. They give him a so-called know-nothing diocese. There's no such thing as a know-nothing diocese in France. And then to his rescue was the religious order that he was a part of, the Holy Ghost Fathers, now known as the Spiritans. And they elected him superior. So he was that bishop of that diocese in France, Toulay, I believe it was, for very long. And then how quickly they turned on him. And they basically kicked him out at 68, 69, and he was pretty much hopeless. And he'll tell you, he's like, what did I do wrong? Where in the mid-50s, it was clear that he was going to be named a cardinal. He was on the road to that. He did phenomenal work in Africa among the bishops. And then all of a sudden, he's running a bookstore in Rome. And if it wasn't for a motley crew of seminarians coming to him and saying, teach us how to be truly priests, who knows what would have happened? That's what we have to really discuss. And so what I see here is a reminder on both sides that you have to have an open mind and have a conversation with people, because that's how you're going to change hearts. You're not going to change hearts by saying, I told you so, or you should have realized this from the beginning, or don't enter this church without a manteletta. If you're going to say things like that are just going to aggravate people, it's going to cause a problem. But if we're able to come at it with charity on both sides and have that conversation, look what could happen. we could get fired up for a bishop that, even though he's in a so-called know-nothing diocese in Texas,
Yeah.
is that there's this groundswell to support him. Again, this is a man who's only celebrated the traditional mass a couple of times.
Yeah.
But what we're seeing is he's starting to stand up for the faith, and you're starting to see him become that martyr that we need to see our shepherds be, to say, hey, wait a minute, let's stop this. Now, a lot of people have been asking me, is Bishop Strickland going to be canceled? Will he be removed from ministry?
I was just going to ask you that.
It would not be surprised to me if he was removed. But in a way, and I don't mean to sound sadistic in any way, but in a way, I almost hope he is, because it's that just one more straw on that camel's back. Somebody finally said to me, what would be the straw that breaks the camel's back when it comes to the George Weigels of the world? And I said, it's going to be Humanae Vitae. They will not know what to do with themselves if Humanae Vitae falls. It's as simple as that. And guess what? If you don't think they're already stacking the deck for that, they have been for the last 10 years. They've been destroying any type of decent morality that was left in the Roman universities, at the John Paul II Institute, whether in Rome or DC. They've been replacing all of them, and they're just now setting it up to come out and say, finally, you can contracept to your heart's delight. And I think that will be it. I could be wrong. Some people might say, Father, you're idealistic. The Pope splaiters are always going to back themselves out of an argument, but I don't know how they're going to walk themselves out of that. And just bear in mind, the person that was the biggest champion for Humanae Vitae was Janet Smith, and she still is, yes. Don't get me wrong, but she has fully embraced tradition. And all I have to say, and I don't know if you were in the room when she was giving me a hard time, I'm glad she's on our side. I can tell you that right now.
Yeah, I was really impressed with her talk. I really was really impressed with her in general. She was pretty special. You know what? There's actually, in Humanae Vitae is the logic to overturn Humanae Vitae. A lot of people look past a certain paragraph, and I don't have chapter and verse in my head, but there's an inference in there. There's basically an inference in there to population control. It's very slight, and the reasoning is basically why it's okay to have a lot of kids based on population things. And personally, and it's a modernist time bomb. You know, this is what we see in the documents of Vatican II. You know, which, by the way, just a little piece of trivia here. If someone asks you if you accept Vatican II, you can actually just point them to, at this point, almost a 10-year-old teaching from Archbishop Pozzo, who was in charge of the Ecclesia Dei communities, he literally said, you don't have to accept a couple of the documents because they contain in them things he basically said they contain in them things that are debatable and not doctrines. And he was talking about Nostra Aetate and Dignitatis Humanae, which is what the society has said for years, and they were, called this, that, and the other thing. And here's a man who's a conservative, but he's not necessarily a traditionalist, and he was saying, of course you can, look at Nostra Aetate. One of the reasons why I've said, how could you ever expect someone to accept all of Vatican II per se, when there are statements about Buddhism that just aren't technically correct about Buddhism? It's not about whether or not I think that you should dialogue with another religion for reasons of evangelization. Of course you should. But it's like, Buddhists believe this, and it's like, actually, they kind of don't believe that necessarily, or you didn't distinguish what type of Buddhists and things. So common sense that you don't have to agree with a document like that, because it's not about religion, it's about sociology. Anyway, but
if I could jump in here, because you reminded me of a question I asked actually all the priests in the Chicago Priory when I had lunch with them, and Father Pagliani, who was there at the time, is what I said in the priest Q&A. Tell me what anathema, tell me what new teaching is in Vatican II that I am supposed to submit to, because I have right here the canons and dogmatic canons and decrees of the Council of Trent in Vatican I. This tells me what Trent teaches. All right. And, Father Altman asked everybody to raise their hand who read even one document of Vatican II. Ladies and gentlemen, let me tell you something. There are 16 documents of Vatican II. Almost all of them will put you to sleep if you try to read them. There's only four. There's only four important ones. The ones that they call the Constitution.
Yes.
Sanctum Sanctum Concilium, which, by the way, the Missal of 1962 is closer to Sacro Sanctum Concilium
than
than
anything.
the Missal of 1969.
Yeah.
Lumen Gentium, Gaudium et Spes, which is basically the appendix to Lumen Gentium, and Dei Verbum. Those are basically the four. And if you're going to narrow it down even more, it is just simply this: Lumen Gentium.
Yes.
All right, and the church's role now in the modern world. And again, they're not teaching anything new. What they are suggesting is that the church should take a step back from being involved with the state and almost take, and you and I have talked about this before, this kind of American type of view of separation of church and state, which in a lot of ways comes in handy, especially during COVID, and the government couldn't interfere with houses of worship. But in another way, and you saw this with the great debates that Archbishop Lefebvre had with Cardinal Ratzinger, is that the state and the church have to be working together. They cannot be separate. You have to bring in the reignship of Christ now, not some far off mystical,
not at the end of time, not at the end of time like the current liturgical calendar.
It is now. It is now that the reign of Christ the King has to end. And so what people have to realize is there's nothing dogmatic that I have to submit to. And I said this in the question and answer. And I realized that he is a critic of the Society of Pius X. But Timothy Gordon said that he started out wanting to show how we did not need to submit to Vatican II, and then came around and decided that we have to. I want to have a conversation with him. I might have him back on my show again and say, Tim, please tell me what teaching do I have to submit to? Because not even the priests could really tell me in the society when I had lunch with them. I asked Janet Smith directly there, and she said, what changed prior, what changed post 1965 that wasn't already there in the Deposit of Faith pre-1962? And for those that don't know, 62 is when the council started, and 65 is when it ended. So we have to keep that in mind. So I'm all for recognizing Vatican II as a council. Great, fine. We've had a lot of councils that went into the dustbin of history. And again, Gordon brings this up. There were at least 2 or 3 in the medieval times that declared nothing and were so-called pastoral or whatever you want to call them. But, we got to get to the heart of the matter is that we need to start getting people to really understand how important Trent was, how important it is to learn the catechism, the Roman catechism, to teach that to your faith. That the Americans have given one gift to the English-speaking world. It's the Baltimore Catechism. And we have to start teaching our kids to be the best Catholics that they can be. And we have to start getting into a mindset that is going to be radically different, not just from evangelical Protestantism or Protestantism in general, but is going to be radically different from how the world is thinking right now. We have to start an anti-modernist movement that is built completely on charity. Sorry, I'll get off my soapbox right now. So
that's all right. Yeah. I don't understand the insistence on this sort of submission to Vatican II, because I don't know what you're supposed to, again, I don't know what I'm supposed to submit to. It just, I don't get it, So, I mean, what's the line? Is it Gaudium et Spes where it says, modern man is becoming more aware of the dignity of the human person or something like that? I can't submit to that because it's not true. It's just like, it's not faith and morals. It's just gobbledygook. Like, it's just.
Yeah, I mean, it's just, and again, that's at least one of the documents that is interesting to read. 12 of the 16 will put you to sleep of the document. But, I'll say this. Should modern man, not modernist, but modern man, know more and better the dignity of human life because of science, then yes, but the opposite.
You could say that. Yeah, you could say that. But even there, it's impossible to formulate that as a dogmatic statement. This one thing too, like I'm basically a creationist. I don't believe in evolution and stuff. And people will ask me, well, why won't the church, if they think like me, well, could the church ever anathematize Darwinism or something? I said, you know what? They actually probably really couldn't, in a sense, because when the church anathematizes things, it has to be very clear and specific what they're anathematizing. The charitable anathema is very narrow for reasons of charity, because if you're going to say somebody's outside of the church or, into this exterior darkness, you better be exactly correct about what you're saying. Because if you're wrong, that's a grave crime. And when the church declares something to be infallible or de fide, it must always be very narrowly interpreted. And one of the greatest scholars right now, at least he's very readable, which is hard to find amongst these scholars, is Dr. John Joy. And he talks about sort of the limits of papal infallibility. And his argument, which I find to be very fascinating, is there's a narrowness to how all these things are interpreted. And when you have this key of narrowness, you avoid a lot of the confusion. Like, for example, let's take Vatican I and the supremacy of the Pope, the supreme arbiter, and all these kinds of things. If you look at that narrowly, then it's very easy to see the Pope's supreme authority as in all ways of governance, without getting into a place where you put the Pope into a category of person that is somehow impeccable as a human being, which is the logical consequence of a very broad interpretation of it. And this is what we see. I was having a conversation with Brian Holdsworth, who I really respect his show, another Canadian with a beard, so he can't be that bad. And we talked about the SSPX. This is 3 months ago or so on his channel. He attends the fraternity out in Alberta. And we were having a great conversation. And like all these conversations about the SSPX, it came back to we really had a difference in first principles about what we believed about the church. That was the main issue. Because he kept going, but you get to this point where Vatican I, the Pope is the supreme head. So, and I'm thinking, you're right. If the interpretation is a broad understanding, well, then at that point, we don't even have a right to not like the Novus Ordo. If we're going to follow the logic through all the way, if we're saying the Pope basically is like the Oracle of Delphi, which I know is a caricature, but in reality, this is why you see popes playing, etc., because they at least implicitly believe something like that, then you have to find a way where what he's saying must be followed, and therefore all things he does and says are somehow perfect, or at least not containing some sort of danger in them. But this is impossible. And this, I've never understood, I think, was it today? Is it today the feast day, or the whichever pope it was that anathematized Honorius? He anathematized.
And yeah, he's today. And then tomorrow, 4th of July, when this is being recorded, tomorrow is the feast of all holy popes. Two wonderful feast days in the octave of St. Peter and Paul. I mean, it's great.
Yeah. And I mean, he anathematized Honorius because he didn't defend the church against a heresy. That's basically the crux of it. He wasn't even necessarily a heretic himself, but he was anathematized because he didn't do a good enough job.
Yeah.
And I'm thinking, you have to understand, you have to look at these things when trying to interpret these dogmas of infallibility, because again, if not, you're going to get to the point where you basically have to suspend your critical thinking skills, which would go against Vatican I in one sense, because Vatican I is very clear that it's actually a heresy to say that you need Scripture and the church to know the existence of God. Because the idea is that the place of reason is so fundamental that you can know the basic truths of the universe just by reason alone, which is in the Scriptures. This is why St. Paul says, basically the pagans have no excuse because the nature of God is written on their heart and they chose to ignore it. And anyway, so you have to, everything has to be looked at in a three-dimensional perspective. And you have to interpret the infallibility claims of this and that very narrowly. Otherwise, I've heard an analogy before about the virtues, the four cardinal virtues. It's kind of like four buoys on the water. And basically, they're all supposed to be floating. So if you pull on one too much, it causes the other ones to raise, and the other one disappears. The goal is to keep them all in the water, basically. And if we lose perspective of that, then we have what Chesterton would talk about. He said, a heresy is basically a truth exalted in spite of all the other truths, or despite all the other truths. Anyway, my soapbox is done. I did find the paragraph, Father, though, from Humanae Generis, or no, Humanae
Ladies
Vitae.
and gentlemen, he gave that wonderful soliloquy right there while also searching the internet. Talk about a man that can multitask.
Well, also, Humanae Generis, my mind is spinning right now. People will point to that as proof that you can adopt the theory of evolution, and all it says in paragraph 36 is that experts in both fields can look into the existence of pre-existing matter, whether it's living or not. So that's all there is there. But anyway, I'm going to share my screen here. Where is it? There you go. Oopsie daisy. like that. There you go. This is Humanae Vitae, encyclical letter about contraception, essentially. So here is the money line. Paragraph 2. And this is where they're going to go after Humanae Vitae. This is my unsolicited prophecy. It says the changes that have taken place are of considerable importance and varied nature. In the first place, there is the rapid increase in population, which has made many fear that world population is going to grow faster than available resources, with the consequences that many families in developing countries would be faced with greater hardships. This can easily induce public authorities to be tempted to take even harsher measures to avert this danger. There is also the fact that not only working and housing conditions, but the greater demands made both in the economic and educational field pose a living situation in which it is frequently difficult these days to provide properly for a large family. Again, this is the spirit of Vatican II gobbledygook here. What does this even mean? These days, it's hard to provide for a family. That has no place in a talk. Respectfully to all involved, like that sort of language has no place in some sort of teaching document. That's just anyway. But it goes on to say, but the most remarkable development of all is to be seen in man's stupendous progress in the domination and rational organization of the forces of nature, to the point that he is endeavoring to extend this control over every aspect of his own life, over his body, etc., 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 etc. Anyway, so what happens is, basically, the idea is, taking all that into account, we're so good at being sciencey now that we don't have a reason to not contracept. And that is going to be where they're going to attack Humanae Vitae. And Pope Francis has made this very clear with the Laudato Si paradigm. It may have been the case when Paul VI wrote this, that at the time, X, Y, and Z was sufficient. But as we have seen under the magisterium of Francis, the ecological crisis, blah, 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 therefore the rationale for that no longer exists. That's my opinion about how they're going to go after Humanae Vitae. What do you think?
I think you're correct, and let's take a look at a few things here. So you drove to the conference last week, correct?
Yep.
You drove through the Midwest of the United States, okay? You drove through the breadbasket of the United States. The states of Illinois and Indiana alone could feed probably the entire Western Hemisphere.
They could. That's right.
All right. Yeah. But what are you seeing in Europe? The same area of land that is almost the same climate and soil as the Midwest, Ukraine. They're warring over that. You have the big globalists telling us we got to start learning how to eat bugs. All right. You even see this. I watch this being nuanced so well in commercials for training exercises and for diets about finding, ancient peat and all of this. They're trying to start to convince people, all right, ignore all that food that you're growing out there. Ignore the cow, slaughter the cows, because the flatulation is going to destroy the planet. All right.
Yeah.
So they're manufacturing a crisis where people are not going to be able to sustain themselves, especially in parts of the world that are not as fruitful as the Midwest. I mean, look what's happening up in Quebec right now. I mean, we suffered last week from the smoke from that. I texted you about that. You had a great crib. You're like, it's just 1812 all over again.
It's the spirit of 1812 lives on,
And it felt like it, and it's just this. And people want to say, well, you're just being a conspiracy theorist. Really? Am I? I mean, this doesn't make any sense. We have enough resources. I think we're at 6 or 7 billion in the population. Let's even go higher. Let's just say it's 8. Okay. But we're there where any reasonable person will tell you that we could easily feed 12 to 14 billion people on this planet and have room for them.
Oh, yeah.
And if people don't think that there's room, go to Western Montana, go to Western Canada. You're going to see.
Come to Ontario. Ontario is 3 times the size of Texas, and we have 1/3 the population.
Yeah. And by the way, go to Texas, and you can go a long time without seeing another human being in Texas. But, you're absolutely correct. But I think it's manufactured. We have to be careful about this. If we could get back to Vatican I for a second, it is, and I've said this numerous times because I'm a big fan of his, St. John Henry Newman, Cardinal Newman said this, is that you have to be careful about Vatican I and how you interpret it. And I'm paraphrasing, is that, don't don't make the Pope into, as you say, this oracle.
Mm-hmm.
And he warned about that. So for all these people that like to talk about Cardinal Newman being the father of Vatican II, no. All right. Vatican I was talking about the Pope. Vatican II was talking about the bishops. But what we need to start talking about, and what we need to get back to is what I said earlier, is that the actual reign of Christ now. And when we're starting to keep our focus on that, then we can start talking about the dignity of the human person. Then we can start to talk about the importance of the family. Because even though the society was created by Archbishop Lefebvre in order to save the priesthood, the crisis, and I've said this so many times, and I'll keep saying it until I'm blue in the face, the crisis in vocation is not to the priesthood or even religious life, even though there's a lot of things that need to be fixed. The crisis right now is in the family. Yeah. And so somebody says, Father, where do you see your hope? Well, I see my hope with you, Kennedy, and your family. A few years ago, you were a modernist Catholic, moderate in practice at best. You went and you had a strong conversion down in Guadalupe, in Mexico City. You came back and basically said to your wife, we are going to be the best Catholics that we can be. I see that countless times, but it's just, and this is the whole point of the conference, I think, and that part of the fellowship that I was talking about, is that you're able to see these young families. I was actually impressed by how many young people came to the conference.
Yeah, far more. Pretty cool.
Yeah. Now, the majority of people still older? Yes, of course, because they have the time and they have the money to spend to go to conferences like this on average. So it was great, but it was great to see so many young people there and young families. And that's what we need to see. And so at any time when somebody says to me, oh, well, the traditional movement, and it doesn't matter if it's a society or the Ecclesia Dei communities, well, they're just a small part of the Catholic world. They are now. Let's see where they're going to be in 20 years. You're going to see that table flip very quickly, in my opinion.
I mean, give it 12 years. My buddy, shout out Mark, he's 11 children, only 11. And I think him and his wife are not even 40 yet. So, there's still time left for a few more. And, so him and I were at the lake the other day. Our wives were on a vacation and we had our kids. And we had 16 kids with 2 dads. And obviously he had the majority of them. But nonetheless, I mean, his oldest is 17. His youngest is, an infant. And our kids are in this age group. I mean, in 10 years, they're going to be in their late teens and 20s. In 10 years, the baby boomer generation is going to fall off a demographic cliff. It's reaching towards 70 now is the average boomer age. And the Bible tells us you get 70 years, 80 if you're strong. That demographic cliff is staring us right in the face. And once we fall over it, there will be no liberals to pick up the pieces. I mean, I know it sounds a little bit like we can't just wait it out, but there is a reality of, if the people are literally gone, then they're just gone. And the only people there are the faithful Catholics. And also I do take, when people say, the traditional movement is only a small part of the church. Well, let's break down a little bit of math here. We know that about 80% to 85% of baptized Catholics don't attend Mass at all. That's just the general statistics from North America. It's probably more in some European countries. It's probably the highest in the States because America is still a highly religious country from cultural habit compared to most Western nations. In Canada, it's probably 12 to 15% of Catholics go to Mass on Sunday. We know out of those who attend Mass, whatever the number is, let's just call it roughly half, don't believe in the real peasants. It might be more. And so if you think about that small amount of Catholics who are attending Mass, and then a small amount of those who are attending believe in the real presence, and then you compare that with the traditional movement, pound for pound, if you look at the actual numbers of believing Catholics attending traditional Latin Mass faithfully in your diocese, it's actually a significant portion of the actual practical and active believing Catholics, which is why the Vatican is going after them. If they were simply a tiny fringe minority, like the so-called truckers, the fringe minority Trudeau called them, if they were actually a fringe minority, they wouldn't go after them, because their influence would be insignificant. But the fact that they are going after them shows that it's not a matter of numbers, it's a matter of influence. Again, the numbers are more in a practical sense than people think, and they punch way above their weight. Within 15 to 20 years, we're going to be seeing in your average diocese, because these people that go to the traditional mass, they're not going to stop. They're not going to stop. But again, like we said, we're not in 1988. 1988, people thought, oh, what should we do? Maybe we should do that. Maybe we shouldn't do this. Everyone who's made the decision to be a trad in 2023, they know exactly what they're doing. You know, I was sitting at the table with, and I should give a shout out. How do you pronounce her last name? Halla, the family that started help us start the. Yeah, Holly.
Holly.
That's right, Holly.
Yeah, Holly.
Yeah, they're wonderful people, amazing. And I was sitting with the Alcorns, and you know, these are families that they attend, you know, St. John Cantius, the Institute, whatever, around Chicago area. But we're the same. We're talking about things. It's like it's the same thing. These people have found tradition since 1988, and they heard the church bells and they smelt the incense and they walked in, and they were there for the faith, not for the fact that it was or was not an Ecclesia Dei community. They were there for the traditional Catholic faith, and they're all prepared to do what is necessary to keep the faith, and they're not going to stop going to the traditional mass. And in 15 to 20 years, it's going to be it's like the food pyramid upside down. There's going to be the traditional Catholics who are swelling out the cry rooms aren't big enough. Those kids that are in the cry rooms now are moving into the actual sanctuary. And the Novus Ordos, all the blue-haired ladies will be dead. And I don't know what they're going to do.
Well, we're seeing what they're doing. I mean, look at the Archdiocese of Chicago. We're going from when I was born in 1980, where they had about 479 parishes, give or take, 475. All right. Supich is gleefully hoping to have that number down to 200 by 2025. I mean, that's in 45 years to have that destruction happen. And we're not even talking about the school system, the Catholic school system that has been completely destroyed in the United States, and I'm sure in Canada as well.
Yeah,
it's just amazing. And now look what you have here. You know, Archbishop Sample, this isn't getting a lot of news. He had to shut down the education office in Portland because he had so many parents and teachers rising up saying, oh, how dare you say that we can't let the kids choose their personal pronouns? I mean, this is the craziness that we're living in, is that there's going to be a split in the Archdiocese of Portland because the Archbishop came out and said, you're going to refer to a biological male as a male and a biological female as a female. All right. Let's hope he doesn't go too far where they're going to do an apostolic visitation on him. Now, and this is what we're coming down to, sadly.
Yeah, God forbid he says something like 2 + 2 is 4. We wouldn't want that. Yeah. Okay. Last question I want to ask, because we're approaching that 45-minute mark here. One of the forgotten characters by a lot of people in the history of the traditional movement is Bishop Castro, who was the Bishop of Campos, Brazil. And him and Archbishop Lefebvre were both in very providential positions. And this is why I worry about Bishop Strickland, because I worry for him, I should say, not about what he's doing. I worry for him. Lefebvre was in a providential position where he was a bishop who had an order, which was very rare. It's actually very hard to find that historically. And then in Campos with Bishop Castro, he was a bishop who just decided from basically day one not to implement the new mass and to keep things the way they were. So he had his jurisdictional territory. Weirdly, they never kind of went after him. He's kind of just operating as a bishop with the diocese and just sort of didn't do it. And he was just kind of going with it. So very strange. So, but those men were both in positions where, on the one hand, Lefebvre had the order. On the other hand, Campos, Brazil had a diocese. So they were able to keep going. I mean, they were canceled in a sense, but still with an infrastructure. Do you foresee something like that happening where, you know, we just bring up Bishop Sample? He's a quiet hero that not a lot of people talk about. But he is a defender of Catholic tradition. He really is. He's done a pretty great job. And I mean, he's out there. And
both him and Archbishop Cordileone. I mean, they've been bigger. In my opinion, this is not a slight against Bishop Strickland, but those two have actually been more promoters of the traditional mass than Bishop Strickland. And again, I'm not knocking
Yes.
Bishop Strickland.
No, you're right though. Strictly of tradition though. Like they've dipped their toes deeper into the action. And well, Sample's done things for years with una voce type of society, una voce type events or whatever. But anyway, so I mean, we're now at the position where you have these men of good sense. Do we foresee a Bishop Castro situation coming up within the next couple of years? Is there going to be a bishop who, when they try to implement, whatever rainbow agenda from the Synod on Synodality, Synod, will we see someone just saying, I'm not going to budge? Does that infrastructure even exist? What do you think?
Well, it's interesting that you bring that up because we have a house here in Northwest Indiana. You've been here. And Father Trico, who was part of the coalition and answered some wonderful questions up on stage, he came a few days early and was staying at the house before the conference. And he was reading the book. I believe it's called, I have it right here in the other room, called The Mouth of the Lion. It's by Angelus Press, and it's about Castro de Mayer and about the Diocese of Campos. If you actually look on a map, it kind of looks like a head of a lion. And I kept saying to him, finish the book before you go back to Florida and leave the book with me so I can read it. Well, unfortunately, he was, the morning before we left for the conference, he was sitting outside reading it and left it outside. And of course, being the Midwest in June, it rained and it got soaking wet. It's still drying right now, but I can't wait to really crack it open. One, because I'm a lover of biographies, but I want to read more about Castro de Mayer because he seems like just that lion that you needed. Even though it's at least population-wise, it was a small diocese. He stood his ground. Yes. I think it was even in the Lefebvre biography by TCA that he was even considered more traditionalist than Lefebvre was.
Yes.
And unbending in a lot of ways. So I'm really looking forward to seeing this. But what I think you're going to see, and this is what I talked about in the question and answer, you're going to see slowly but surely the canceled priests uniting, even if it's in an underground. We already have one safe house. We're planning on in the future having more, of where we can camp out, because not everybody can join the society because it is a very unique missionary vocation. Oh, yeah. And if you get canceled when you're in your 50s and 60s, and then you're told, hey, by the way, you're going to be on a plane every weekend, flying here, there, and everywhere, or driving 5-6 hours to the chapel, priests that age can't necessarily adapt to that.
No, you can't.
And we know this already. Mm-hmm. So what you're going to start seeing is that buildup. And what I want to say, especially to those, whether priests or laity, on the that attend the Society of St. Pius X, is that we have to be very much open to letting people in. I'm having conversations already with Father Fullerton. We started this back in October, just so the coalition can start looking at basically the syllabus that the society requires when they do have priests come in, so we can start having our priests take a look at it and find any deficiencies that we have in our formation, moral theology, dogmatic, and philosophical, and just start filling in those gaps so that we can be the best priests that we can be, but also that we can have that network. Okay, Michael Matt was right about this when Traditionis Custodes came out. This ain't 1970. Mm-hmm. People are a lot better organized, and I can tell you right now, I know a few fraternity parishes that they can in 6 hours have everything packed up and out of that building if they were kicked out. They've been going through the plans, and maybe I shouldn't say that, but I've listened to them. I've listened to the parishioners. They are not going to give up the Mass. It's as simple as that, and it's going to take a lot more than just them removing the buildings from us. And I think we proved that over the weekend with the conference. We're going to find a place to worship together. We're going to find a place to preach the gospel. And we're going to become very much like Athanasius. And in my opinion, I was telling David L. Gray this morning when he was interviewing me, I think we're in a worse crisis now than even the Arian heresy. And ladies and gentlemen, for those of you that are not familiar with the Arian heresy, it was bad. It was really, really bad. And it went on for a very long time, longer than most people think.
It was, it was, They think it got fixed because of the Council of Nicaea, but no, it was still around in the time of Augustine. It was 150 years of rooting that out. So I mean, we're about a third of the way through modernism. We're about a third of the way through the public type of modernism, but we've been in modernism for about 120 years. So anyway, that's Pius X had to write the encyclical in 1907 for a reason. And by that point, he had been distilling down his ideas probably throughout most of his priesthood, and he was, going off of the priests before him or the popes before him. I mean, it's been in the works for a couple hundred years. So, all right. Last thing I'm going to say, I promise. You're exactly right. Back in the I wasn't alive then, but back in the 70s and 80s, you hear about all these people renting hotel rooms and funeral homes and things like that to have mass. I guarantee you tomorrow, if Blazing Saddles, Supich, if they just said no more TLM in my diocese, it'd be a standing appointment at the Rosemont or Hilton Rosemont, whatever hotel, where you'd have the biggest room rented out every single Sunday, and it would be packed with 300 or 400 people, and they'd have to do 5 or 6 masses every day or what. I mean, like, people are just not going to start going to the Novus Ordo. It's just not going to happen. It's a very select few of Pope-splaining traditional-ish people online who talk as if obedience is the whole of the law. That will do it, but the average person raising his kids, he's not going to stop taking his kids to where his kids want to be priests, to where he wonders if women can be priests. It's just not going to happen. So people need to realize that. Okay, Father, any parting words of wisdom? Tell us where to go for the coalition, those sorts of things.
We are giving 2 a day until they're all out. We are Monday, July 3rd as we record this, so we should have this all out by Friday. All the talks, John Henry Weston will cap it off since he was our keynote.
Right.
But we're releasing 2 a day for free. YouTube, Rumble, and Spiritus TV. Highly recommend Rumble or Spiritus TV. They already censored Abby Johnson's talk on YouTube. We are giving these talks away for free, but we highly encourage people to go to canceledpriests.org to make a donation. And we have information there if you want to send a check, if you want to just donate online. We have different categories that you can give to. If you want to offset the cost of the conference, please go there. As great as the conference was, it took a lot of work. And I just want to thank our staff, especially Kayla Williams, Joseph Gallagher, and Tom Oglesby for putting together such a great conference. And it was just great times. And thank you again, Kennedy, for coming. You rock the house. I think you opened up a lot of minds and a lot of hearts, and that's the whole point of having a conversation. That's the whole point of evangelization, is to open hearts, and that's the most important thing. So you were certainly a terror to demons last weekend. Thank you for coming.
Well, thank you. Ladies and gentlemen, if you do watch my talk, I recommend you go check it out, my talk on Archbishop Lefebvre and the Society at the Coalition for Canceled Priests, YouTube, Rumble, Spiritus, etc. And if you do like the speech and you think, hey, I wouldn't mind having a schismatic come talk in my conference, you can find the link to contact me in the description to this video, and I'd be happy to oblige that. So, ladies and gentlemen, as always, let me know what you think in the comments. This has been the Kennedy Report. Until next time, God bless.
Ladies and gentlemen, I hope you enjoyed the show. Again, thank you for all your support, and be on the lookout for some big announcements coming out soon about the channel. That's all I'll say about that, but I'll talk to you soon.